says. So when Robert wants to criticize Islam, I'm wondering, is that criticism on the basis of the Bible? Is that on the basis of the church tradition? Or is this a liberal, secular, modernist critique of Islam?
It's intriguing to see former Muslims defend Christianity on a major podcast. Check this clip out.
You've said you've read the Quran dozens of times. You've studied it. You've written about it. You've talked about it. Even I think the government used 2 of your books in 2011 that Wire talked about, right? I don't know what the 2 books were. I think one of them was about Prophet Muhammad and, So your background, you've been in this world. What is your biggest challenge and differences with the religion of Islam?
Well, probably the main thing is the sanctification of violence and the idea that God will bless and even calls upon the believers to commit acts of violence under certain circumstances. Like Rashid here is an ex-Muslim, and so under Islamic law, as it's traditionally and classically formulated, he would be put to death. Muhammad said, anybody who changes his religion, kill him. And it's still the position of all of the schools of Islamic jurisprudence, Sunni and Shia, that the apostate should be put to death. Now, obviously, this is not something that means that every apostate has to always go around watching himself, because you have to have somebody who's willing to do that. But those who do it, they think, well, now I have done something that Allah has commanded, and He will bless me for doing it. And me, myself, because I was standing up for the freedom of speech, 2015, Pamela Geller and I put on in Texas a Muhammad art exhibit and cartoon contest. And it was actually, we featured a lot of classic Shiite Persian art depicting Muhammad, as well as contemporary art that was from a more critical standpoint. And a couple of jihadis came from Phoenix, key members, actually, of the Islamic Community Center of Phoenix. One of them was featured in a recruitment video for them, and they tried to kill us. And so I actually would be also under a death sentence just for drawing Muhammad and for sponsoring people who do, which I did not in order to cause gratuitous insult, but to defend the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, which is the foundation of any genuinely free society.
Now, this man you're about to hear is a white Caucasian Muslim, which is pretty rare, but listen to his arguments against Christianity and how this former Muslim responds. Check it out.
Danny, what would you say to that? What's your response to that?
Yeah, so just a few points here. Number one, it's interesting how we want to talk about Islam as a religion, but the religion is 95%, like what Jake mentioned. It's about worshiping God, being devoted to a righteous way of life, loving your neighbors, taking care of your parents. That's what 95% of Islam is about. Yes, there are criminal punishments, which we're going to discuss. There is conquest, there is war theory, there's all of this in Islam. But it's interesting how when a conversation is about Islam, we focus on that 5% instead of the 95% of what Islam is about. We don't see this kind of double standard with like Christians. So if you have someone like Matt Walsh is a traditional Christian. There's slavery in the Bible. There's punishment for blasphemers in the Bible. There's killing of heretics in the church tradition. There's no discussion of that with Matt Walsh, right? Or Ben Shapiro. There is killing of blasphemers in the Hebrew Bible. There is, punishments for apostasy in the Talmud. There's no discussion of that with Ben Shapiro. You can talk about, other values, and that's what the discussion focuses on. But the Islamophobic narrative is just lasering in on these specific topics, which is fine. We can discuss that, but I just want to note the double standard. So the other framing of this whole discussion that I want to put out here, though, is that I'm wondering, like this standard of, there should be no punishment for blasphemy, for example. Let's just put that out there. There should be no punishment for mocking and insulting a religion, attacking people's values. Is that coming from a Christian perspective? Is that coming from is that coming from the church tradition? Is that coming from the Bible? Because when we look at the Bible, we see in Leviticus, we see in Deuteronomy that blasphemers should be put to death. Even if you entice, the Bible says, if you entice like your son or your daughter or your wife entices you to worship other than God, then have no mercy. Put them to death without due process mentioned, without any kind of court or tribunal. The husband or the father should just immediately put them to death without mercy. That's what the Bible says. So when Robert wants to criticize Islam, I'm wondering, is that criticism on the basis of the Bible? Is that on the basis of the church tradition, or is this a liberal, secular, modernist critique of Islam? So I want to know, am I debating or discussing with two Christians or two atheists or two liberal secularists? Like, that's a clarification that we need.
May I?
Yes.
This is a very important clarification, and there are a couple of distinctions that have to be made. One is all of your examples from Christianity are from Old Testament law, which if you had studied Christianity, you would know there's no sect of Christianity, no school of Christian thought, no tradition within Christianity that holds that Old Testament law applies to Christians for all time. As a matter of fact, it never did apply. Even in Judaism, after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the rabbis redefined Judaism so that even they don't teach that those punishments have ongoing validity. So you're talking about something that nobody in mainstream Judaism or Christianity thinks is valid today versus something that unfortunately all too many Muslims do think is valid today. And the bringing up of ancient historical wrongdoing is all very well, and there's certainly a place for that. I've got no interest in denying any of the misdeeds of Christians throughout history. But the problem that we have in Islam is that these passages of the Quran that are problematic, passages of Muhammad's traditions that are problematic, they are still considered to be in force by very large numbers of Muslims, such that all the major terrorist groups around the world are Islamic groups. And you don't have any Christian terrorist groups saying Jesus is Lord and blowing people up. There's a reason for that. And the reasons have to do with the interpretative traditions in both religions.
Now, many people say that Muslims and Christians are all worshiping the same God, but we see a clear distinction when you look at the Quran and the Bible. When I hear verses from the Quran, when I hear Muslims talk, I get the sense of this God that they worship that is very out there, seemingly cold and like not very present with his creation and almost just about to smite anybody that is not a Muslim. Whereas with Christianity in the Bible, you see a God that wants to save the entire world. He wants people to come into relationship with him, so much so that he came to earth to die for these people on the cross. Islam would say God would never become a man. That's blasphemous. Christianity says God did become a man through Jesus, and not only that, he was born in a stable and lived a very humble life to reach his creation and then died for them with the most cruel punishment possible. Now, when it comes to Muslim devotion, right, you think about head coverings, fastings, praying 3 or 7 times a day, right? You hear about these acts, these outward expressions of religious devotion to their God. Whereas with Christianity, true Christianity, you see people love Jesus in tears over God, worshiping him with all their hearts and living their lives abandoned to him because they love him, not because a religious system told them to do it. I don't really hear about Muslims saying how much they love Allah. I don't think I've ever heard that, or any Muslims say, Allah loves you, he's changed my life, he's amazing. But just go on YouTube and type in Christian testimony and you'll see testimony after testimony after testimony. Drug addicts, former atheists, depressed, suicide, all these different types of people coming to Jesus, having encounters with God, and being transformed by the love of the true creator. And then when you think about afterlife, right, what do you think of when you think about Muslim afterlife? I think a bunch of people get pictures of virgins in heaven for these faithful men who served Allah during their life. It seems pretty sensual. I mean, are we going to have sex in heaven? I don't think so. That seems very carnal in my opinion. Whereas with Christianity and the Bible, you hear about the afterlife being with Jesus and being close to God in this wonderful union, glorifying him. It's not about sensual activity. Even Jesus says we won't be married in heaven. There won't be any marriages. I'm sure you'll be close with the person you're married to on earth, but in heaven there is no sensual intercourse. It's this spiritual relationship with the living God, even though we have glorified bodies. So you see these differences between these two major world religions. And again, I'm not trying to knock any other religion. I'm not trying to knock Muslims. Maybe they're right, but I don't think they are. I have I've had encounters with the living God. I've been transformed. I've been delivered from drugs and addiction and all these things. I've experienced the living God and have experienced Jesus in my life and have seen him touch. So if you're to ask me, why aren't you a Muslim? It's because I've never encountered Allah or Muhammad. I've encountered Jesus, and my life has been completely transformed by this living God because I want to know the truth. I'm not here trying to say it's all about Christianity or whatever. I'm saying, look, I've had experiences with the living God. My life has been transformed. I've done research. I've looked at the historical documents and such. I've seen the reality that keeps building on the fact that Jesus Christ is Lord, he is the Son of God, and he's coming back to rule and reign. So if you're a Muslim, right, and you're mad at me, hey, look, I love you, I bless you, but I'm saying this, I believe in Jesus because I've met Jesus, and I've never encountered Allah or any other God like him. He's the true God. He's revealed himself to me and so many others. May the Lord bless you. I'll see you in the next one.